the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett. Welcome. Pleasure to have you on the show, at this table. Let's start with Iran, because it does seem to be a major escalation. What do you think was behind it? Because it feels as though Israel has enough on its hands right now, trying to deal with how to conclude this war, what to do in Gaza. What do you think motivated this strike?
Well, obviously, I can't comment on the strike itself. What I can say is Iran is an octopus of terror. Its head is in Tehran, and then it sends its tentacles all around Israel and the Middle East. In Lebanon, they have Hezbollah. In Gaza, they have Islamic Jihad and a bit of Hamas, the Houthis, all around. And they've been pounding Israel using their arms, while their head was sort of immune. So the age of immunity for Iran's head is over. It doesn't make sense to keep on fighting just the tips of the fingertips of these arms while letting Iran itself get away from it.
But is there a danger that this escalation then triggers an Iranian reaction and Israel has to get, not distracted, but has to now turn its focus on that issue?
You see, Iran is already in full-fledged war against Israel starting October 7th and before. But it's a one-sided boxing match. They're up hitting us, and they've not been on the receiving side. They just hit us with their octopus arms. So if anything, this sort of move is the right approach, but needs to be done in a persistent way, because it turns out that Iranian leadership is much softer and does not want to pay its own price. They love using other people's lives.
Right.
They send their proxies, but when it's Iranian lives at stake, suddenly they become much more timid.
Even Hezbollah has been fairly cautious in terms of, if you listen to Nasrallah's speech, he wished Hamas well, but it was clear he was not going to help them in any way.
I think that's a fairly good interpretation of Nasrallah. He understands that if he were to enter war on behalf of Iran against Israel, the people who would pay the price are the Lebanese. And since Nasrallah portrays himself as the protector of Lebanon, in fact, he would become the destroyer of Lebanon if he would make that mistake to go to full-out war with Israel.
Let me ask you about Israel's war strategy itself, because you early on outlined a very different approach than what Bibi Netanyahu did, which I certainly thought was very interesting and innovative, which was flush out Hamas, siege them, force them to come out of their holes, rather than this very massive, essentially ground invasion. Do you think at this point, at least, they could move to that strategy in the remaining parts? Because it feels like to get at these last 1,000 or 2,000 Hamas militants, they're paying an enormous price in terms of radicalization of Palestinians, radicalization of the Arab world.
Well, first of all, it's true I presented an alternative strategy, but once my government, the government of Israel, adopted its strategy, I stand behind it. At this point, there are basically two options the way I see it. One is to flush out Hamas, or actually have the citizens of Rafah leave, and then you're left with Hamas in Rafah and can deal with them isolated on a siege-based tactic, or go in. I'm not going to comment what the government is going to do. Both options can make sense. Yes, it's tough. It involves a lot of friction that we've been seeing over the past half year.
Do you think there are a lot of people who believe that Bibi Netanyahu is prolonging this war because he knows that the majority of Israeli public, vast majority of Israeli public, say the minute the war ends, we want Netanyahu out, which means, he has an incentive not to have the war end?
Well, the war takes time for the very fundamental reason that we have thousands and thousands of Hamas terrorist militants embedded within civilians, and because we're not cavalier about civilian lives, we have to be very selective and very cautious and slow, and it takes much more time. And we have a huge undertaking of dismantling the underground terror tunnel operation that Hamas built for 20 years. So it takes time. I do think that we need to speed things up. We don't have an unlimited clock out there. And, if it were up to me, I would move much quicker on the various phases.
But do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu is prolonging the war because he knows his political future is at stake?
I think he's not alone in the war cabinet, so I think that the decisions are being made for the right reasons. One can disagree with one decision or another, but by and large, the goal is to defeat Hamas. We can't finish this war when Hamas is standing. We can't have an organization that explicitly said that it wants to destroy the Jewish nation and has done the worst thing possible and said that it's going to try and do it again and again. So we have to eliminate Hamas.
So let me press you on one issue, which is you did have a different strategy. The one that Bibi Netanyahu has adopted has resulted in the destruction of about 60% of Gaza. It has resulted in 35,000 civilians dying. It has resulted in more aid workers dying than in all the Gaza wars combined. It has resulted in more journalists dying than in all the Gaza wars combined. At this point, 1.1 million people are on the verge of famine. Surely this has been counterproductive for Israel, but you're still, I understand you need to, outside of Israel, support the government, but I mean, it seems like the strategy has come with huge costs, and I'm not sure the benefits outweigh them.
There's one goal, or two goals actually. One goal is to bring the hostages home, and the other goal is to fully eliminate Hamas, which is a genocidal terror organization. And there's no easy way to do it. Regardless of the fact that I presented a different strategy, I'm not sure my strategy was better. You never know.
But what does it mean to? I understand people keep saying destroy Hamas. Well, you've destroyed tens of thousands of their fighters. Ultimately, what is Hamas? It is the idea of armed resistance. Aren't you radicalizing? Aren't you creating, as Donald Rumsfeld would say, aren't you creating more terrorists than you're killing?
No, I don't think so. People always say it's an idea and what can you do with an idea, but also Nazism was an idea. And once you eradicate the regime and there's no territory where that regime controls, and then it becomes an idea that can fade away, or there still are some neo-Nazis, but we don't think that Nazism right now is a problem. Likewise here, look, they were radical enough under a much more generous period and regime, yet they conducted the October 7th attacks, and unfortunately I have to say that a vast majority of Gaza citizens support those attacks. This is not to say that we're going to try and target citizens, we don't. It is to say that the basic necessity is to eradicate Hamas. And what does it mean? It means to either kill the combatants or to capture them and then move them out to Qatar or something. So I could envision thousands of these terrorists getting on a ship, going to Qatar, and that would spell the end of the war.
But then what do you do in Gaza? Because at that point, again, you've so radicalized Palestinians, they're not going to be willing to ride on the back of Israeli tanks, and the PA is not going to come in and govern the Arab. This is what I hear from Arab countries. We're not going to be willing to touch that. So you've created a situation where Israel will have to occupy Gaza again.
No, I disagree. I think the key to success is to take away the hope of Hamas resurgence. Once that hope is gone, then there is a process of de-radicalization, which means that we'll need that the education and media in Gaza will stop teaching the little children in Gaza that Jews are the Satan and pigs.
They've just been bombed for the last months.
So was Dresden, so was Berlin, so was Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Tokyo.
But America didn't have to live side by side Japanese. You guys, I mean, you have these Palestinians are not going anywhere.
Which all the more means that we have to get the job done.
All right, I got to ask you before we go. Are you going to run for prime minister?
I've not decided yet. I had planned on a decade off from politics after my decade in politics. It's a very tough occupation. but my country is not in great shape right now, so I'll think about it and I'll let you know here on this show, Fareed.
Is that a promise?
Almost.
Naftali Bennett, pleasure to have you on, sir.
Thank you.